Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. So it's time to talk about the 9, almost 10 books that I read in April. There's a book that I'm currently listening to on audio and I only have 2 hours left of the audiobook, but I haven't had time to finish it before filming this wrap up. So I'm still going to talk about it because it is part of a series that I started in April. If you're new here, the way that I usually structure my wrap ups is I start by talking about the books that I read that are part of series, and then I talk about the books that I read that are part of standalones. That didn't make sense. We're going to start with a series update and then we're going to review some standalones, is what I was trying to say. But the first series that I started and almost finished in April is the Earthseed duology by Octavia E. Butler. The first book is The Parable of the Sower, and yeah, I'm currently reading A Parable of the Talents. At this point, I can almost confidently say that I think this is going to be one of my favourite series of all time. I read Kindred by Octavia E. Butler a few years ago and gave it 5 stars, loved it. So I went into Parable of the Sower with fairly high expectations, but I wasn't expecting it to exceed those expectations in the way that it has. It's a dystopian that was written or published in 1994, but it's set in 2024. And in this alternative history or future, depending on how you want to look at it, the world has fallen apart. So there's climate change problems, which has meant that water is now super expensive. There's a drug epidemic and the government is extremely corrupt. We're following this main character called Lauren, and I think she's around 14 or 15 at the start of the book, and she lives in this gated community in California where she's relatively safe. Obviously they know what's happening outside of their walls, but she is part of this community that looks out for each other. She hears the adults in her life talking about the good old days and how they just have to keep going and wait for things to go back to how they used to be. However, Lauren doesn't believe this. She thinks that things are only going to get worse and they should be focusing on that and preparing for that. Lauren also has a condition called hyperempathy, which means that she can feel other people's pain, which is obviously a pretty big problem to have in this type of world where people are going through a lot of pain. It feels very factual in the way that it's written. I think because it's told as a series of diary entries, there's some awful things that happen, but Lauren writes about them in a very blunt and direct way because the things that are happening are things that unfortunately she is just used to experiencing in this world. The second book in particular has a big focus on faith and religion. It is present in the first book. You learn quite early on that Lauren is establishing a new religion. I don't know whether that's the right phrasing to use, but some people see it as a cult rather than a religion. She has a certain set of beliefs that she's trying to spread the message about. And I thought the way that the different elements and just the way that all of the different themes were woven together, I thought it was really impactful. It's been quite an intense reading experience, which is why I've read it quite slowly, especially the second book. It's very rare that I get this feeling while reading a series. So I gave the first book 5 stars and I'm pretty confident that the second book is going to be another 5 stars. The next book that I read that's part of the series is The Atlas 6 by Olivie Blake. This is book 1 in, I think it's called the Atlas trilogy, and this is the definition of a book that is all vibes, no plot. It's very character driven, and I think if you don't feel anything towards the characters, if you don't like them or you don't find them interesting, then you're not going to enjoy this book. It's magical, dark academia, so it's set in our world, but magicians are part of society. We follow 6 magicians who are given this opportunity to join the Alexandrian Society. And that's pretty much all you really need to know about the book. We are exploring this really interesting group dynamic. I found it really interesting. I did quite enjoy following these different characters and learning about each of their magical abilities. The characters don't trust each other, and so there are these alliances that are being formed, and I did like the ending. I can't really talk too much about it because of spoilers, but the way that this leaves off, it makes me feel really excited for the rest of the trilogy because it deals with something that I personally really enjoy reading about in sci-fi and fantasy. So those are the books that I read that are part of series. I'm now going to move on to chat about some books that I read that are standalones. The first of which is Check and Mate by Ali Hazelwood. This is Ali Hazelwood's YA contemporary romance. So I previously read her adult contemporary romances, and I almost didn't read this because it's YA, and I thought to myself, I'm not going to enjoy it because it's YA, and I don't tend to read YA contemporary romances. I am so glad that I did pick this up because I think this is one of my favourite Ali Hazelwood books. We're following a main character who I think is called Mallory, and she is a chess prodigy, but she hasn't played in years, ever since something happened involving her dad. But her best friend convinces her to take part in this charity tournament where she ends up playing against the world's #1 chess player, and she beats him. So the rest of the book is following Mallory as she is given this sponsorship opportunity. She has to accept it because her family are struggling financially, and we're following Mallory as she's working her way up through the ranks, and she's also getting to know this guy, and I just thought they had a really fun dynamic, and I loved that this was about chess. If you don't care about chess, then you might find this quite boring because there's a lot of playing chess and talking about chess and strategizing about chess, but I ate it up. I loved this so much, and I didn't see much difference actually between this and Ali Hazelwood's adult romances. Obviously it's YA and so there's no smut, but I don't need smut to enjoy a romance book, and I thought there were so many layers to this story. So Mallory is the oldest sister, and she feels a lot of pressure to take care of her younger siblings, and I thought the way that that was explored was done in a really interesting way. There were a few plot conveniences and a lot of slang that went straight over my head, but I can forgive that in a book where I know I'm not the intended audience, and yeah, it's made me more open to reading YA romances, especially when they're written by an author whose books I've enjoyed in the past. The next book I read, I'm not going to talk too much about because I honestly don't have much to say about it, but the next book I read was The Perfect Son by Frieda McFadden. This is about a woman whose son is accused of kidnapping a girl from his school, and she thinks he might actually be guilty. That is literally the plot, and I found this a little bit more tedious than some of Frieda McFadden's other books that I've read. I gave it 3 stars because it was perfectly fine. I enjoyed listening to the audiobook. I find that Frieda McFadden audiobooks are really good for when I want to feel motivated to go to the gym, and that is the thing about Frieda McFadden books. Her writing is quite simplistic and conversational, but there's something about her books that once you start reading them, you don't want to put them down. The next book that I read was Nettle and Bone by Kingfisher. This I enjoyed. I think I gave it 4 stars. I liked how it had this adult fairy tale-like feeling. We're following a main character who learns that her sister is being abused by her husband, who happens to be the king of this neighbouring country, and so our main character goes on this quest to kill this king. There's a lot of obstacles that she has to overcome along the way, and she acquires this group of people as she is going on this quest, and I loved the found family vibes. There was a lot that I enjoyed about this book, but there was something about the tone that didn't quite work for me. It had this very upbeat and light-hearted tone, but the actual content was quite dark. Would recommend if it sounds like your kind of thing and you don't mind something that feels a little bit random and nonsensical at times. I don't think this is my favourite book that I've read so far by T. Kingfisher. I actually read 3 of her books for a reading vlog that I did in April. There was one book that I read in March, but then I read Nettle and Bone and also What Moves the Dead in April. I keep getting confused what month we're on, but yeah, I did read this in April. That's the month that we're talking about in this wrap up. So What Moves the Dead is actually more horror than fantasy. T. Kingfisher writes 2 types of genres, whimsical fantasy and horror, and I think I do prefer her horror writing. This is a retelling of The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe, which I've never read, but I did see the TV show last year that was based on Edgar Allan Poe's works, so I was kind of familiar with the story, but not really. I don't know whether that would have impacted on my enjoyment, but I did really like this. It follows a main character who receives a letter from their friend Madeline Usher, who they haven't really spoken to in years, but it seems like Madeline is quite seriously ill, potentially dying. So our main character, whose name is Alex, arrives at Madeline's house where she lives with her brother Roderick, and there's some creepy stuff going on. That's all I'm going to say. I don't think you really need to know much more than that, but I loved the atmosphere in this. It was very gothic and creepy, but it didn't go as far as I wanted it to. It's around 240 pages, and I got to the end and thought, yes, that was the perfect length. There was never a point where I was bored, but I also got to the end and I felt like it had come to a natural conclusion. Next up, I read The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo, which was one of my most anticipated releases for 2024. I think. I can't remember if I actually mentioned this in my anticipated releases video. It feels like a book I would have mentioned, even though I haven't really enjoyed the last few books that I've read by Leigh Bardugo. I went into this with open expectations and I loved the first half. I thought the atmosphere was fantastic and I loved how the fantasy elements were integrated into the historical setting. So this is set in the 1600s in Spain, and we're following this main character Lucia, who is a scullery maid, and she works for this couple who are not very well liked within society because they don't really have that much money, and the wife is not very charismatic. The woman that Lucia works for discovers that she has a magical ability. She can create these little miracles, is what she calls them, and because of this, Lucia is brought out to entertain their guests, and she is used to try and further their standing in society. A lot of the characters in this are trying to further their station, essentially, and Lucia, I found her an interesting character at times, but the main thing that I struggled with in this book was the romance. So there's this guy that's introduced and he is also trying to escape a situation that he's in, and I just didn't find their relationship that believable. I didn't think it was built up in a way where I could really feel that they were connecting and that they were attracted to each other and that they liked each other. It all just felt a little bit forced. So even though there were some elements of this that I did like, I felt like the second half focused too much on this relationship that I just didn't believe in. I do think that Leigh Bardugo has this great ability to draw you in and keep you turning the page. Whenever I pick up a Leigh Bardugo book, I know to expect the unexpected. I know that there's a possibility that it's not going to go exactly how I'm expecting it to, and I enjoy that. So yeah, I liked my time reading this, but I don't think it's going to stick with me long term. I think if you liked The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden, then this could really work for you because it felt very deeply rooted within the historical setting with just a sprinkle of magic. The next book that I picked up was The Family Experiment by John Marrs, which is a sci-fi dystopian thriller that's set in the same universe as some of John Marrs's other books, including The One, The Passengers, and The Marriage Act, which I read last year. The One, I think, is still going to be my favourite book within this universe, if that's what you want to call it. But The Family Experiment was almost 5 stars. I think this is my second favourite. Even though it can be read as a standalone, I do think that if you haven't read the previous books that are set within this world, you might find some aspects of the world building a little bit jarring because each book builds on the previous book. For example, in this book, it's kind of just accepted as the norm that there are self-driving cars and there are DNA matches, as in you can match your DNA to find your soulmate. reality, which is established in the first book. Obviously, I was okay with that because I have read the previous books, but I think if you haven't, then you just have to be prepared for that. So this follows several different couples who are taking part in a reality TV show where they are raising a virtual child in the metaverse from birth through to the age of 18. It's a sped up process, so this happens over a period of 9 months, and the winner can either keep their virtual child or they can accept the prize money and go out and have a live child in the real world. The social commentary in this is done so well, and it's very dark. There are some quite distressing and disturbing scenes, especially involving children, so just something that I wanted to mention as a general content warning. There are discussions around morality and whether AI humans deserve the same rights as live humans. Poverty is also a big theme because it's one of the reasons why people are no longer having live children and why this company have been able to come up with this concept of raising children in the metaverse, which basically just means online, like within a digital setting. Fantastic, loads of twists and turns, very dark, and this comes out I think in early May. It might even be out by the time this video goes live, but I had an arc of this through NetGalley and I'm so glad that I read it because this is going to be one of my favourite thrillers I think of the year. The final book that I read in April was A Love Song for Ricki Wilde by Tia Williams. I'm actually not going to talk too much about my thoughts on this book in this wrap up because I am currently filming a reading vlog where I feature this book, and I don't want to spoil that vlog because it's going to be coming out not long after this video. But if you want some top level thoughts, I thought this was beautifully romantic, loved the atmosphere, and there's just something about Tia Williams's writing that really works for me. However, I wasn't the biggest fan of the romance, which, considering this is a romance book, was a shame. This has a lot of build-up, but the build-up doesn't really focus on the relationship. It focuses on the main character's journey of moving to New York and opening a flower shop and following her dream. I loved all of that, but it meant that once the romance was introduced, not even when it was introduced, but once we got to the point where the romance was becoming more of a focus, I didn't feel that invested, and I also felt like it was a bit insta-lovey. It tries to excuse it by talking about destiny and fate, and I did feel like when the characters were interacting, they had really natural chemistry, but I just wish that there'd been a bit more build-up. So yeah, I gave this one 4 or maybe a 4.5 stars. It's difficult because I was so hooked in the beginning, but I feel like it kind of lost its way in the second half. That does bring me to the end of this video though, so thank you for watching if you made it this far. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and click subscribe if you would like to see more videos from me, but otherwise I will see you next time. Bye!